The last thing my dad ever said to me before I shipped out was, "You won't make it past boot camp." No hug, no handshake, just a stiff nod in a parking lot that smelled like gasoline and goodbye. He was a retired Marine, tough as nails. Impossible to impress, and for as long as I can remember, I was never enough. Not strong enough, not disciplined enough, not man enough. I grew up in his shadow, always one mistake away from another lecture, another look of disappointment. That day, standing beside my worn-out duffel bag, I knew what he really meant. "You're not like me. You'll fail." And I carried that like a weight on my back. You see, this isn't just a story about military training or earning stripes. It's about proving your worth when the person who should believe in you most doesn't. Maybe you've felt that too, being underestimated by your own family, labeled the failure, the soft one, the lost cause. Maybe you've spent years trying to turn pain into purpose, just hoping for one moment where they see you differently. This story? It's about that moment. Because 10 years later, in full dress uniform, standing on a stage I once thought was a dream too big for me, everything changed. My dad was there, and so was someone else's old drill sergeant, the man who trained him, and the same man who would end up saluting me. You're going to want to hear how that happened, because this isn't just my story, it could be yours too. If you've ever struggled to earn respect from someone who should have given it freely, stay with me. What happens next might change how you see your past and your future. If this hits home for you, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. And if you find value here, go ahead and like this video and subscribe for more real, raw, and inspiring stories that remind you you're not alone. My name's Tyler. I'm 32 now. But this story begins when I was 18, skinny, unsure, and standing in a parking lot with a duffel bag and a lump in my throat. I had just enlisted in the military. Not because I wanted to prove something to the world, but because I needed to prove something to him, my dad. He was a Marine through and through, retired, but still walked like he had a drill sergeant watching his every step. To me, he was always larger than life, strict, sharp, and cold. He believed in order, in toughness, in winning, and when it came to me, he believed not much. Growing up, I was the quiet one, sensitive, more into books than sports, more likely to walk away from a fight than start one. My older brother? He was the golden child, star quarterback, dad's spitting image, but me? I was the kid who didn't have it in him. The day I told my dad I'd enlisted, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd look at me differently, be proud, even for a second. But all he said was, "You won't make it past boot camp," just like that. No hesitation, no encouragement, just his final judgment, dropped like a hammer. That moment stuck with me. It wasn't the words, really it was the look in his eyes, like he had already decided I would fail, like my story was already written. So I left home angry, not at him exactly, but at this version of me he had built in his mind. I didn't know yet who I was, but I was damn sure I wasn't whoever he thought. Boot camp was hell. Not gonna sugarcoat it. I was slower than the others, smaller, quieter, and yeah, I wanted to quit more than once. But every time I hit a wall, I heard his voice in my head. "You won't make it." And maybe it's weird, but that voice, it kept me going. It made me push harder. When I was dragging through the mud at 5 a.m., soaked and freezing, I pictured him watching, judging, waiting for me to break. But I didn't. I made it through boot camp. I made it through training. And after a few years, I started climbing the ranks, slowly, quietly, without fanfare. I wasn't the loudest or the flashiest. But I showed up. I did the work. I led with respect, not fear. And for the first time in my life, people started seeing something in me. Still, I didn't hear much from my dad. A birthday call here, a quick, stay safe text when I was deployed. But never once did he say, "I'm proud of you." And I kept telling myself I didn't need to hear it, that I didn't care. But deep down, I did. Of course I did. Because no matter how far I'd come, a part of me was still that 18-year-old kid in the parking lot, hoping for something more than silence. But everything started to change the day I got the call. It was a formal event promotion ceremony. A big one. I had earned my general star. And this time, my dad said he'd be there. I didn't know what to expect. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 years. Would he say anything? Would he clap? Or would it be just another nod and a cold congrats? What happened next? I'll never forget. But I'll tell you that in part 2. Stick around, because when I say everything changed, I mean it. And not just for me. Because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see your story too. The ceremony was already in full swing by the time I stepped onto the base. People in uniform, medals gleaming, soft murmurs of family members in folding chairs. The air smelled like warm concrete and fresh-cut grass. I scanned the crowd quickly, heart pounding, and there he was, me dad. Sitting stiff, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He hadn't changed a bit. I didn't wave, didn't smile. I just turned and followed my commanding officer to the front. The ceremony went by in a blur, some words I barely heard, the moment they pinned the silver star on my shoulder. Applause, flashes from a few cameras, a handshake. Then, something I didn't expect. An older man stepped forward, tall, built like a tank, uniform sharp as a blade. He looked vaguely familiar, but it took me a second to place him. And then it clicked. He was my dad's old drill sergeant, the one I had only heard stories about, the man who'd supposedly made Marines out of boys, who was tougher than steel and colder than ice. He didn't say a word, just looked me in the eye and saluted. A crisp, sharp salute. And then I heard it, a voice from behind me. "General." It was my father. I turned. For a second, I thought I imagined it, but No was standing now. No sunglasses, looking right at me. And for the first time in my entire life, there was pride in his face. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. He stepped forward slowly, nodded to the old sergeant, and then said something I'll never forget. I served under this man 30 years ago, and today, I saw him salute my son. He turned to me again. I never thought I'd see this day, but I'm glad I was wrong. There was silence. Everyone seemed to pause, like even the wind stopped moving. And then he did something I didn't see coming. He offered me his hand. It wasn't just a handshake. It wasn't formal. It wasn't stiff. It was quiet, but strong. And when I gripped his hand, something shifted. Years of tension, distance, and doubt, something in that moment cracked open. We didn't hug. That's not who we were. Not yet. But that handshake, it was the first real connection we'd had in years. Maybe ever. After the ceremony, we found ourselves standing alone near the parking lot. Funny how everything seems to circle back to parking lots. He looked at me, slower this time. "You know," he said, "I was wrong about you." I didn't say anything, just waited. He cleared his throat, like the words were stuck somewhere deep. "I thought you needed to be like me to make it. Tough. Hard. No room for softness." He looked away for a second, then back at me. But maybe I didn't understand what strength really looked like. And that meant more to me than any medal, any promotion. Because for once, I wasn't just proving him wrong. I was finally being seen. That night, we had dinner together. Nothing fancy, just burgers at a roadside diner off base. We didn't talk about emotions, or the past, or the fights. We talked about baseball, old war stories. The kind of small things you miss when you're always trying to prove something. He asked about my team, about the people I led. Listened, really listened, when I told him how I ran things. Respect, not fear. Clarity, not yelling. Leading by example. He nodded slowly. "You do things different, but maybe better." For a man like him, that was as close to a full-blown confession as I was ever gonna get. When we said goodbye that night, He clapped a hand on my shoulder. No speech, no drama, just, proud of you, son. And this time, I believed it. The drive home was quiet. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there in the silence, letting the weight of everything settle. It's strange, the things we carry. Expectations, old wounds, the stories people write about us before we've had a chance to write our own. But what I've learned is this sometimes: the moment you stop trying to prove someone wrong is the moment they finally see who you really are. And sometimes, they're ready to let go of their old story too. A week after the ceremony, I found a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in block letters. Inside was a photo, an old black and white snapshot of my dad in uniform. Younger, sharper, standing next to the same drill sergeant who had saluted me. On the back, in faint pencil, it read, Fort Leonard Wood, 1978. First time I felt like I earned something. No note, no explanation, but I knew why he sent it. That single photo said more than words ever could. It was his way of saying, now I understand what this meant to you. And maybe I remember what it meant to me, too. A few days later, he called. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. I almost didn't answer. I stared at the screen for a good 10 seconds, thumb frozen in the air, then finally picked up. Hey, he said. Just that. Hey, I replied. There was a pause, but not the awkward kind. It felt careful, like we were both standing on the edge of something important and didn't want to fall too fast. You got that photo? He asked. I did, thanks for that. He cleared his throat. I figured you'd get it. I do, I said. I really do. We didn't dive deep. Not yet. But that call turned into another, and then another. We started talking every Sunday. It became a quiet ritual, nothing big or loud, just consistent. Some weeks we talked about football. Others, he'd ask me about the guys in my unit. He never said it out loud, but I think he liked hearing how I led them. I think it helped him understand that strength didn't have to look the way he always thought it did. One Sunday, after a few months of these calls, he asked if he could come visit. Nothing formal, he said. Just want to see where you work. Maybe meet a few of your folks. When he arrived, he didn't bring gifts. No balloons. Just himself, in his old worn-out boots and a freshly ironed shirt. He walked into the base, eyes scanning everything. Not judging, just observing. I introduced him to my team, and I'll never forget the way he shook each of their hands. Firm, respectful, steady. One of them, a young sergeant from Georgia, pulled me aside afterward and said, Man, your dad? He's the real deal. Yeah, he was, in his own way. After the tour, we sat under a tree just outside the training field. It was hot, but he didn't seem to mind. He looked out at the field and said, You run a tight ship. Thanks, I said. He turned to me. You remind me of myself when I started. Only, you've got more patience. I laughed. Well, I had to work on that. He smiled, the kind of quiet smile that didn't come easy for him. Guess we both had to work on some things. He took off his cap and rubbed the back of his neck. You know, when you were little, I always thought you were too soft, too quiet. I worried about you. I know, I said. But I didn't get it then. I see it now, though. That softness, that quiet strength, that's what makes people trust you. That's why they follow you. I didn't know what to say. That was probably the most vulnerable thing he'd ever told me. Then he added, I'm not saying I was a bad father. I did what I knew. But I see now. I didn't leave much space for you to be who you were. You did your best, I said, and I meant it. We sat in silence again. This time, it felt full, not empty. As the sun started to dip behind the trees, he said, I hope you know I'm proud of you. Not just for the uniform, for the man you are. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the hard edges. I saw a man who had done his best, stumbled, but showed up anyway. A man trying to make things right. "Thanks, Dad," I said. "That means more than you know." When he left that day, he didn't hug me, but he paused before getting into his truck, looked back, and said, "You ever need anything, you call. No questions." That was his way of saying, "I've got your back now." Later that night, I sat on my porch, thinking about all the years I spent chasing his approval, trying to be what I thought he respected, only to realize that the moment I stopped chasing was the moment he started to understand me. Sometimes reconciliation doesn't come in one big, tearful moment. Sometimes it's a quiet walk around a base, a photo in the mail, a handshake that lingers just a second longer than usual. Healing isn't always loud, but it's real. And sometimes, the hardest man you've ever known surprises you by learning how to say the words you waited your whole life to hear. A few months after that visit, I got deployed overseas. It wasn't my first time, but this one felt heavier, not just because of the mission, but because things were finally good between me and my dad. For the first time in my life, I didn't leave angry. I didn't leave feeling like I had something to prove. I left feeling seen, and that changed everything. Before I flew out, he showed up at the airport. No warning, just there, waiting near the security gate in his old denim jacket, holding a thermos like it was just another morning. I walked up to him, surprised. He handed me the thermos black coffee, just the way he liked it. "You're gonna need this," he said, then paused. "I figured I owed you a proper send-off." We didn't say much, but it didn't matter. It was enough that he came. A few weeks into the deployment, we started writing each other letters, actual handwritten letters, like it was the 70s again. He said emails felt too cold. Said there's something different about taking the time to write things out. I think he just needed the space to open up without eye contact, without pressure. His letters were simple. Stories from his younger days. Updates on the truck he was fixing. Jokes about the neighbors. But sometimes, he'd slip in something deeper, like this one line I'll never forget. "I used to think strength was never bending, but now I think real strength is knowing when to." That hit me, because I realized my dad wasn't just opening up to me, he was unlearning things, rebuilding, piece by piece. One letter came during a rough week. We'd lost a soldier someone under my command. I couldn't sleep. I kept going over what I could have done differently. I didn't tell my dad everything, but I hinted at the weight of it. In his reply, he wrote, "You can do everything right and still carry guilt. That's the cost of leadership. But don't let it turn you to stone. You've still got people looking to you." I read that sentence over and over. I think I cried, quietly, sitting in my bunk in the dark. My father, the man who once mocked every soft part of me, was now reminding me that strength doesn't mean shutting down. We kept writing all through the deployment. And when I finally came home, he was there at the base, standing tall in the crowd. I wasn't expecting him to be, but something in me wasn't surprised. He'd changed. We both had. That night, he came over to my place. We sat on the porch like we used to, only this time, we didn't talk about the past or argue about old scars. We just sat, comfortable, quiet. Two grown men who had finally figured out how to be father and son. As the evening wore on, I handed him a beer and said, "You know, if someone had told me 5 years ago we'd be like this, I would have laughed in their face." He smiled. "Yeah, me too." There was a pause. Then he said, "I wasn't good at being your dad when you needed me most. I see that now. But I'm here now, for whatever time we've got left, and I want to get it right." I looked at him. "You are getting it right." He nodded, and for the first time, I think he actually believed it. The next morning, before he left, he gave me something. A small, square box. Inside was his old dog, tag-scratched, worn, the chain a little rusted. "I always thought I'd pass this down to someone who followed the exact same path I did," he said. "But you made your own, and I'm prouder of that than anything I ever did." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just pulled him in for a hug. No words, just gratitude. Deep, quiet gratitude. After he left, I sat with that dog tag in my hand for a long time. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of legacy, of healing, of a bond that took years to build but finally stood strong. Some stories about fathers and sons are loud and dramatic. Others are slow burns full of missed chances, small gestures, and the kind of love that has to fight to be understood. Ours was the latter. But in the end, we found our way, not by trying to fix the past, but by choosing to show up, again and again, in the present. And that was enough. A few years later, life shifted again quietly, without warning. My dad started forgetting things. First, it was small stuff. Where he parked the truck, what day it was, the name of a neighbor he'd known for decades. At first, we joked about it. He'd laugh and say, "Guess my brain's just taking early retirement." But deep down, I knew it wasn't just forgetfulness. I'd seen it before in fellow soldiers. The slow fade. The confusion that creeps in and never leaves. One evening, I dropped by to help him fix a light in the kitchen. He opened the door, looked straight at me, and said, "Can I help you?" I froze. It lasted just a few seconds then, his eyes lit up, and he chuckled awkwardly. "Sorry, son. I thought you were one of those door-to-door sales guys." We both laughed it off, but when I got back in the car, I just sat there, keys in hand, staring at the dashboard. That was the first time I felt real fear. The diagnosis came a few months later. Early onset Alzheimer's. He took the news with his usual grit. Said something like, "Well, I always wanted to live in the moment. Looks like I won't have a choice now." But I could see the fear in his eyes, too. And it hit me. We're switching roles now. I wasn't just his son anymore. I was becoming his caretaker, his memory keeper. As time passed, the moments of clarity became fewer. But strangely, in those fading months, we found something rare, tenderness. I'd visit him nearly every day. We'd sit in the backyard, him bundled in a flannel blanket, sipping lukewarm coffee. He'd talk about old war stories, mixing up timelines and names, but I let him speak freely. Sometimes, he'd call me by his brother's name. Sometimes, he'd think I was still 10 years old. But every now and then, he'd look at me with full awareness, like the fog had cleared for a second. And he'd say something like, "You turned out better than I ever imagined." One afternoon, I brought over a photo album I'd made pictures from my deployments, my graduation from officer training, even that moment years ago when his old drill sergeant had saluted me. He stared at that picture for a long time, silent. Then, softly, he said, "He saluted you, because he saw what I was too proud to see." I didn't respond. I just sat beside him, letting the weight of that sentence settle into the air between us. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No swelling music. No tearful embrace. Just quiet understanding. That was always how we worked words few and far between. But when they came, they meant something. The decline was fast. One winter morning, I got a call from the care facility. He'd stopped eating. Just didn't want to anymore. I flew out immediately. When I arrived, he was lying in bed, frail, his once broad shoulders now narrow beneath the sheets. His eyes flickered open when I walked in. For a second, they were clear. "General," he whispered, a faint smile tugging at his lips. That's what he called me now. Not my name. Just General. Maybe it was easier to remember. Or maybe in his mind that title captured who I had become to him. I sat beside him, holding his hand, and told him everything was okay, that I was here, that he didn't need to fight anymore. And for the first time in my life, I saw him cry. Just one tear, tracing the corner of his eye. He blinked slowly, then closed his eyes for good. His funeral was small, no big ceremony, just family, a few old friends, and a handful of veterans who served with him. I wore my dress blues, gave a short eulogy, and afterward, one of his old unit members approached me, a tall man with a cane and a deep voice. Your raised boy? He asked. I nodded. He was tough, stubborn as hell, but he talked about you all the time at the end. Said you taught him how to be a better man. I didn't know what to say. I just shook his hand and whispered, "Thank you." As people started to leave, I stayed behind, standing at the foot of his grave. The wind picked up slightly, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again gruff, commanding, but softer now. I stood straight, gave him a final salute, and whispered, "You made it, Dad. You made it home." Life goes on. Time doesn't pause for healing. But every now and then, I catch myself reaching for the phone when something big happens, like when I got promoted last year. Old habits. Then I remember, and I smile. Because even though he's gone, he's still with me. In the way I lead, in the way I love, in the strength I carry and the softness I've learned to show. Sometimes it takes a lifetime for a father and son to find each other. But when they do, it's worth every mile. A few months after the funeral, I found myself back at the house I grew up in. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just come from silence, but from absence. His boots were still by the door. His old flannel jacket still hung on the coat rack. The house smelled like him coffee, leather, and the faint trace of pipe tobacco. I didn't know why I came back that day. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I just wanted to feel close to him again. In the garage, buried under dusty boxes and old tools, I found a worn-out notebook. It was his handwriting. Inside were pages of notes, thoughts, bits of advice scribbled over the years. Some were practical, like check the oil before a long trip, or always cut away from your body. But then I found a page titled, "If I Ever Forget." It started with, "If I ever forget who you are, don't let it make you doubt who you've become." I sat on the concrete floor, reading line after line. He'd written about his regrets, how he wished he'd said, "I'm proud of you" more, how he struggled with showing affection because of how he was raised, how he knew he'd been hard on me, but it was never because he didn't care. It was because he didn't know how to show it. That notebook changed something in me. For years, I'd carried this idea that I had to earn his approval, that I had to prove something. But those pages, written in shaky, aging script, were his way of saying he'd always seen me, even when he didn't say it out loud. In the final pages, there was one line underlined twice. "Don't become me. Become better than me." That hit me hard, because in many ways, I already had. But now I saw it wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about healing what had broken between us. It was about becoming the kind of man who could lead with both strength and compassion. I left the notebook on his workbench, right where I found it. I didn't need to take it with me. I'd memorized every word that mattered. Back home, I started writing down my own thoughts. Not for anyone else, just for me. Lessons I'd learned, emotions I hadn't processed, and someday, maybe, for my kids. I wanted them to know me better than I ever knew my dad. One day, my daughter came into my home office. She was maybe 7 at the time. She pointed at one of my military photos on the shelf and said, "Were you scared?" I paused. I could have brushed it off, but instead, I knelt down and said, "Yes, a lot of times, but I did it anyway." She smiled. "That's brave, right?" "Yeah," I said. "That's brave." And in that small moment, I felt the circle closing. A new generation, a different story, one that starts not with silence or judgment, but with understanding, patience, and love. So if you're listening to this, maybe you've had your own battles with your father. Maybe you're still carrying weight that isn't yours. Or maybe you're a parent yourself, trying to figure out how to do better. Just know this healing doesn't always come loud. Sometimes, it shows up in whispers, in late-night thoughts, in long drives and quiet forgiveness. And sometimes, the greatest honor isn't in the rank or the medals, but in becoming the version of yourself that the younger you needed all along. So, that's how it all came full circle. From the cold silence in that parking lot where a young woman stood trying not to break after her father's parting words, "You won't make it past boot camp," to the moment she stood tall in uniform, stars on her shoulders, as her father's old drill sergeant saluted her with pride and awe. This wasn't just a military story. It was a story about identity, about becoming, about rising beyond the limitations others place on you, especially those you love the most. We watched her, step by step, climb through fear, failure, and exhaustion. We saw her stumble under the crushing weight of Doubtvis and her own. But we also saw her rise again and again. Not for revenge, not to prove a point, but to become the leader, the woman, the warrior she knew deep down she could be. And in the end, that salute wasn't just for her uniform or her stars. It was for the journey, for the strength it took to keep going when no one clapped, for the quiet courage to lead with empathy, not ego. And maybe, just maybe, it was a sign from the past to the present that she had become someone even her father could never have imagined. So what can we take from this? Sometimes, the love we crave the most comes in the smallest, most unexpected forms. And sometimes, the respect we deserve doesn't come until we stop chasing it and start walking in our truth. This story reminds us that you don't have to be who they said you were. You get to rewrite that script. You get to heal, grow, and become more on your own terms. To every woman watching this who has ever been called too soft, too emotional, not strong enough, you are stronger than they know. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands still. Sometimes it listens. Sometimes it simply endures. And if this story stirred something in your heart, I invite you to share yours too. Drop a comment. Tell us who you are becoming, because your voice matters here. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and full of quiet power, hit like and subscribe. This is a space for truth, for growth, for second chances. Thanks for spending this time with me. Keep going. Keep rising. And remember, you don't need anyone's permission to become everything you were meant to be.